Imagine you are crawling through the freezing mud of central Gaul on a moonless night. It is pitch black, and the only sound is your own labored breathing as you try to slip out of a besieged fortress to call for help. The grass ahead looks perfectly flat, suggesting a safe path to freedom. You take a final breath, commit to the sprint, and plant your foot for the first stride. Suddenly, the ground betrays you. Without warning, your leg plunges into a hidden pit, and a sickening crack echoes in the cold night air. You haven't just twisted an ankle. You have stepped into a lily, a Roman engineering nightmare where a fire-hardened oak stake is buried inside a funnel-shaped hole designed specifically to shatter the shin bone of anyone foolish enough to run. Pain explodes up your leg, blinding and absolute. You act on instinct and try to pull free, but the hook shape of the pit only wedges your broken limb tighter. You are trapped and helpless. Then, from the darkness 50 yards away, you hear the calm, rhythmic breathing of a Roman sentry. He doesn't need to fight you, the ground has already defeated you. This is the terrifying reality of the siege of Alesia in 52 BC. It was not a battle of swords and shields, but a slaughter by shovel and starvation. Before we dissect the brutal genius behind these traps, if you enjoy uncovering the darker tactical realities of history, please hit that like button, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Do you think engineering or courage wins wars? I read every response and I am curious to see where you stand on this historical debate. At Alesia, Julius Caesar found himself staring at the impossible. He was deep in enemy territory, outnumbered, and his career was hanging by a thread. Confronting him was Vercingetorix, the king of the Gauls, a leader who had finally united the tribes and now sat securely atop a massive plateau with 80,000 warriors. Vercingetorix had the high ground, the supplies, and the numbers. He expected Caesar to launch a desperate, bloody assault up the slopes, a suicide mission that would end Roman ambition in Gaul forever. But Caesar did not attack. He looked at the mountain fortress and decided to rewrite the laws of warfare. He ordered his 50,000 legionaries to stop marching and start digging. If he could not beat Vercingetorix in a fair fight, he would simply delete the battlefield. The Romans began a construction project of maniacal proportions, encircling the entire hill with an 11-mile ring of fortifications. These were not just walls, they were a complex death zone of trenches, diverted rivers, and those horrific hidden traps. Caesar wasn't just building a fence, he was building a machine to grind the Gallic spirit into dust. Vercingetorix, watching from the walls, realized the trap too late. He saw the Roman noose tightening and played his only remaining card. Before the circle closed completely, he launched his cavalry through a weak point in the lines. Their mission was not to fight, but to run to the corners of Gaul and summon a massive relief army to crush Caesar from behind. Caesar watched them escape, knowing the clock was ticking and a tidal wave of enemies was coming to wipe him out. Most commanders would retreat, but Caesar instead did something insane. He ordered his men to build a second wall, this time facing outward. The Romans were now effectively trapping themselves inside a donut of fortifications, waiting to be attacked by 80,000 desperate men from the inside and 250,000 furious warriors from the outside. The hunter had voluntarily become the prey. To understand the magnitude of this disaster, we must understand Vercingetorix. He was an anomaly in the chaotic tribal landscape of Gaul. Before him, the Gallic tribes were their own worst enemies, constantly bickering and raiding each other. Vercingetorix changed that equation. He was a nobleman who possessed a rare combination of political charisma and ruthless military discipline. He forged a coalition through blood and iron, famously disciplining wavering chieftains by cutting off their ears or gouging out their eyes. By 52 BC, the Gallic Wars had dragged on for 6 brutal years, and the Roman machine seemed unstoppable. However, just months before Alesia, the machine broke at Gergovia. There, Caesar had attempted to storm the heights, assuming the barbarians would shatter under Roman discipline. He was wrong. Vercingetorix used the high ground effectively, throwing the legions into confusion. For the first time, Julius Caesar was beaten. This victory proved that Rome could bleed and convinced Vercingetorix that he had found the formula to defeat the empire. His success at Gergovia became the architect of his doom at Alesia. When the Romans pursued him again, he chose to retreat to a fortified hill, believing he was setting the same trap. But he failed to account for the adaptability of his enemy. Caesar had learned from his scars and recognized that storming the walls would be a massacre. So, when Vercingetorix looked down from the walls, he saw surveyors instead of scaling ladders. The psychological impact on the Gallic forces was devastating. These warriors wanted to charge and clash swords, but they were forced to watch the Romans dig ditches. Day after day, the Roman line tightened like a constrictor snake. Caesar's men moved millions of cubic feet of earth with baskets and muscle. They built the contravallation, an inner ring featuring parallel ditches 15 feet wide. The inner one was filled with water diverted from local rivers to create a stagnant moat. Ahead of the trenches lay the kill zone. Caesar installed cipi, massive tree trunks with sharpened branches interlaced like the antlers of a giant stag to tangle formations. Then came the lilies, and the stimuli, which were iron-barbed hooks buried in the soil like ancient landmines. A warrior crippled by a stimulus wasn't dead, he was a screaming obstacle to the men behind him, draining the morale of his entire unit. These traps were named with dark, soldierly humor. While the inner wall suffocated the defenders, a new threat grew on the horizon as the relief army approached. Caesar was now in a race against physics, needing to finish a second wall, the circumvallation, before the tidal wave crashed into his rear. The legionaries were now living in a thin strip of land between two hostile perimeters. Inside this hallway lived 50,000 men, thousands of horses, and all their supplies. They were the besiegers and the besieged simultaneously. Every foraging party was a gamble, as they had to find food in a shrinking territory. Caesar ordered the same deadly jewelry to be installed on the outer wall. A Roman soldier on the ramparts could look over his left shoulder to see Vercingetorix's starving troops and over his right shoulder to see the dust cloud of the approaching relief army. Within the Roman camp, discipline became a religion. They knew that if either wall breached, they would be slaughtered. Inside the walls of Alesia, time ran out. Supplies were exhausted, and panic replaced discipline. Vercingetorix made a horrific decision to purge the city of useless mouths, the elderly, women, and children of the local Mandubii tribe. Thousands of civilians shuffled out toward the Roman lines, begging for mercy. Caesar's decision was instantaneous and icy, he was running a siege, not a charity. He ordered the gates to remain barred, forcing the Mandubii to wander the killing fields between the two armies. For days, the civilians died of starvation as both sides watched in silence. This mass death served as a gruesome prelude to the final battle, stripping away any illusion of honor. Finally, the relief army arrived, filling the plain like a landslide. The Roman legionaries were staring at a force 4 times their size. The ground vibrated with the shouting of warriors and the blaring of the carnix, the terrifying Celtic war trumpets. The defining moment arrived when the relief army charged into the kill zone. Horses impaled themselves on hidden stakes, and warriors fell into the lilies. Yet, the Gauls had numbers and paved a road with their own dead to reach the ramparts. The battle reached its crisis at Mount Ray, a weak point where the Roman wall was on lower ground. 60,000 elite Gallic warriors hammered this crack, and the Roman line began to buckle. This was the moment Julius Caesar played his final card. He grabbed his scarlet general's cloak and rode directly into the melee. His presence was electric, and the exhausted legionaries surged forward with newfound strength. While Caesar distracted the front, his Germanic cavalry circled wide and smashed into the Gallic rear. Panic spread like a contagion, and the relief army dissolved. Vercingetorix watched the disaster from the walls and realized his last hope had shattered against the Roman shield wall. The following day, Vercingetorix surrendered with tragic nobility. He rode out alone, performed a final ritual of horsemanship around Caesar's tribunal, and threw his armor at the conqueror's feet. Caesar offered no mercy, the king of the Gauls was chained and later strangled in a Roman dungeon. Alesia reshaped the world map, turning Gaul into a loyal province and giving Caesar the power to overthrow the Republic. However, history is ironic. Just 2 years after Vercingetorix was executed, Caesar himself was butchered on the Senate floor. The conqueror and the conquered met similar violent ends, consumed by the relentless grinder of history. Civilization is often built on a foundation of bones. Was Vercingetorix a hero or a martyr who proved freedom is worth any price? Let me know in the comments below. If you found value in this deep dive, please subscribe and ring the bell. Remember, history is not just names and dates, it is the study of survival.